So, as I said earlier, this panel has already ignited a lot of discussion during the day, and a lot of the themes of leveraging the arts, attractions and cultural heritage of the Pilbara has been touched on all day by many of our speakers. So I do have a few questions that I'd like to pose to you, and maybe we'll get the conversation started from there. So Peter, I just wanted to ask you about what is the importance of national parks within the Pilbara? You know, their biodiversity, conservation and attractions, but also their links to other areas which travellers are already undertaking, like Gascoyne, Sharp Bay, and then further north into the Kimberley.
Thanks very much, Kitty.
Easy question.
Firstly, I'd just like to say Kaya and Nalakaja Wachak Mort Kain Kirak Dijabuja, which is acknowledging the traditional owners for this place in Noongar language.
Wow.
The biodiversity, the conservation and the attractions, it's a very complex name. We used to be called Parks and Wildlife. In the Pilbara, big, bold, beautiful. The biodiversity values, marine biodiversity out off Dampier Archipelago, one of the country's biodiversity hotspots. Most prolific breeding ground for loggerhead turtles, for example. You move east, you go through Murajuga National Park out to Millstream, out to Karratha. North of Karratha you have Fortescue Marsh. It's a nationally listed wetland, migratory birds, you know, it's very, very prolific. Moving further to the east, you've got the Mardu country, Karlamilli National Park, an amazing place. For those people who haven't been there, I do recommend you go there. The conservation values are outstanding as well. And in the Pilbara area, we've got 240 listed priority flora species, 40 listed fauna species, and the number of national parks through that region numbers 8 of 2.5 million hectares. We manage 4 million hectares of land altogether. And I'd just like to focus on the visitation that's happening up in the Pilbara and the untapped potential that is there. We've got Karratha National Park, which has already been identified by Tony as having brand awareness internationally. Mm. In the Pilbara, under our methodology of counting, we get 650,000 visits through our suite of parks. 305,000 of those are into Karratha National Park.
Wow.
When I started with conservation and land management back in 1992, Karratha National Park had 25,000 visits.
Wow.
That's a huge scale of growth. That opportunity is just beckoning at Murajuga.
And what do you put that scale of growth in that? Because that's a short period of time. Is it just that we're better at letting people know about it? Like, why do you think it's grown so much in such a... That's incredible.
It is incredible, and I'll throw some other statistics your way as to why it's happened. 60% of the visitors to Karratha National Park are 55 years or older.
Yeah.
80% of them travel, they're adults, travel in a group of 2 or more. They travel in groups. They're free and independent travellers.
Yeah.
A lot of them are the See Australia and Die, or the grey nomads, as we call them. 20% of the visitors are international tourists.
Wow.
42% are interstate tourists. That means 38% are Western Australians. Now, in our normal statewide statistics, internationals are around 7%, interstates are around 20%, and the rest are intrastate. So it's abnormally high. Why is it abnormally high? Social media, marketing, effective marketing by the industry. Yeah. And the fact that within that park, we actually have a suite of opportunities available to people. And they are outstanding opportunities, but we're partnering in with the private sectors. We have licensed tour operators. We have the Karratha Eco Resort, where there's good quality accommodations. We have a suite of other accommodations available there. The same can be done in Karratha. People have, I think, Alana McTiernan was touching on the fact that you couldn't get into Karratha, it was very expensive. Things have normalised now. We have a great opportunity to work with the Murujuga Aboriginal Corporation and get a much more effective management. I've got to say, for my sins, I did the native title agreement with Murujuga back in the day, and so I was representing the state on there. And when we did that negotiation, we acknowledged the aspirations of the native title claimants to manage the place on behalf of the state for everybody. And I've got to congratulate them because they now have the management capacity. They've been treading that path, and we now have a team of skilled and knowledgeable Aboriginal people who can manage that place. And that place is an outstanding place with the rock art values. And the thing that will open it up is getting access into Consink Bay, and that will also facilitate better management of those values on the north of the Burrup. Yep. Because the current situation is that the Burrup has a very inaccessible jump up track. It's only people who I would call more of the bogan element who go there, and they trash their vehicles, and we don't have a high level of management up there. Now we can do that, but going back, there's a route in terms of the trip planning for people, and they go up the coast. The people who are coming from the south of the state go up the coast via Kalbarri, they swing into Shark Bay, World Heritage Property. Yeah. They swing up past Ningaloo, World Heritage Property. They swing over to Karratha, and then they come back down the middle. And my most recent trip to Karratha, I spoke to a couple of visitors. I said, "Where have you been?" They said, "Oh, we've been Ningaloo here." I said, "Oh, where's the best spot?" They said, "Here." I said, "Have you been out to Karratha? Have you?" "Oh, no, we couldn't. No, there's nothing there." So
there's plenty of opportunities to leverage that.
Absolutely, and it's unlimited in my view. And I think that with those growth factors, that 300,000 visits into Karratha will translate to well over 1 million within 10 years. And on Murujuga, currently we're talking around about 5 to 10,000. The potential there is for it to grow substantially into the hundreds of thousands with good management on the ground.
Thanks, Peter. And all of those people, if it grows to 1 million, were you saying, will be eating oysters in a few years' time.
Exactly.
So it's all sounding pretty good. Glen, as CEO of Australia's Northwest, the question that I wanted to ask you was what do you think is Pilbara's point of difference for visitors? Because I think that's a really good question. I know it's got lots and every region talks about, but what's Pilbara's point of difference and how do we harness it more?
Well, I think Peter's really touched on it in regards to the national parks that the Pilbara has. And if we saw the opening video from the Pilbara Development Commission today, that really reinforced that message as well about the national parks, but also the Indigenous cultural experiences that can be had in the Pilbara.
Yep.
So apart from just being a point of difference, I think together they've got the opportunity to be more than that, but a stimulant to attract people to Western Australia for that specific experience. Peter talked about the visitation numbers to Karratha and the growth we've seen there. Apart from the marketing, I think it's also important to look at the access that park has. Probably, the Bungles in Pernalulu would probably have been marketed more so internationally by Tourism Australia and others, but that gets about 1/10 of that visitation number, 1/12, so much less.
Really?
About 25,000 a year. So Karratha is much more visited, but also the access and the seasonality is a little longer as well. So I think they go hand in hand about having that good access to national parks. But by combining not just Karratha, but you've got Millstream and then Murujuga, you've got a real trail.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to do is look at how we can better link those parks. At the moment, we know there's some access issues between them.
Yeah.
And that really creates an opportunity for, if we're looking at investment infrastructure in the area. That would be one thing I would look at, how to make it easier for people who are travelling through that area.
So the access, making it more accessible and easier for people to come through.
The drive market is the key market for the Pilbara.
Yep.
The drive, yep, as Peter said, with those people who are there, 55 plus age group,
yep,
who are travelling through. And speaking to some of the visitor centres just today who are here, they've seen those numbers being very strong this year, and a lot of that is driven by the national park experience. But I think the opportunity lies in tying that up with the Indigenous cultural experience,
yep,
that we're already seeing. There's some good operators, but who are providing some outstanding experiences within the national parks, but being able to grow a critical mass of product. And I think that's one thing that the Pilbara really needs, is that critical mass of product,
yep,
and experiences. We've got the amazing attractions, and that's building that product around those attractions as well.
Yep.
That'll keep people in the region longer.
Because you do have to have sort of a product that actually can be packaged all together. So like you were saying, we've got the access is good, but people are always looking for that cultural and Aboriginal information and the history of the Pilbara region, and it needs to be in a consolidated package, and that's sort of the areas to work on. Would you agree?
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's grown in the Pilbara over the last 10 years that various agencies have worked on is the Wailu Wave Drive Trail.
Yeah.
That is about linking those icons,
Yeah,
and giving those cultural messages along the way as
Yeah.
well. But it creates a platform to develop new product,
yes,
in that area. And I think while we're here talking about a new Pilbara, that's the opportunity that's out there, is about developing that new product.
yeah, I agree with that. Thanks, Glenn. And Gabrielle, as CEO of the Indigenous Art Code, do you think that a better engagement and understanding of Aboriginal arts and culture can then promote better understanding and genuine valuing of Pilbara Aboriginal culture? I know it's a big question, a big topic, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. But if we look at examples of Pilbara Aboriginal arts and cultural organisations, I think it's important to remember they're successful, many of them, because they're initiated and driven by the Aboriginal people who they belong to.
Yep.
So it's not an outside model being imposed on people. So that's key to their success. And I think that definitely it's a vehicle for better engagement. But in order to do that, we have to, I guess, value the art, but we need to respect culture.
Yep.
And we need to enter into projects or supporting those programs, organisations, the artists from that position of respect. And I guess the first thing to do is to involve those people in discussions like this, because it's them who will drive the success of those initiatives.
Yeah.
But yeah, talking about is it great for engagement? It's easier for me to speak from my experience in the East Pilbara when I manage Māori artists, and definitely I think so many amazing arts projects specifically have come out of the Pilbara, and not just the East Pilbara, from Hedland and from Roebourne. And people that are in the know in the Pilbara know about them, but unlike outside the Pilbara, there's far more interest in those artists and their work. And and now things are changing. There's great galleries in Hedland and the Spinifex Hill Studio and the East Pilbara Arts Centre now with the Māori Gallery. But up until recently, you had to go to the National Gallery Victoria to see that work.
That's terrible, isn't it?
Or, you had to go to the Museum of Contemporary Art or the National Museum of Australia. And I don't think that in the Pilbara people quite realise the achievements of those artists. They're really punching above their weight, I guess. It's a pipe dream for many to have an exhibition at the MCA.
Yeah.
But artists from the Pilbara have. And with exhibitions and projects like the Canning Stockroot exhibition, or We Don't Need a Map, they provide a vehicle for, the artists to share their culture, and a whole lot of other people to access that culture from the Pilbara that otherwise wouldn't.
Yes.
So, Māori, again, an example. So many people come into that centre, or would go to visit an art centre in Roebourne or in Hedland, and that's often their only, their only direct experience with an Aboriginal person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think it's a better way for a great way for engagement
Isn't it?
and better understanding.
So there really is, we're talking about raising awareness, education, education and opportunities for non-Aboriginal people to have a better understanding, both within the Pilbara and outside of the Pilbara.
Yeah, and also the artists there's art, but there's other cultural organisations like Chidlow and Wongamaya, and even the land management programs. But the participants, the Aboriginal participants, are, from my understanding, doing it because they want to share that with a broader audience.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an opportunity that everybody should harness and, grab because it's been offered to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thanks, Gabrielle. And Peter, I just wanted to, while we're talking about that, I wanted to touch on Aboriginal tourism. How does the Pilbara advance the financial sustainability and viability for Aboriginal groups through tourism? And is tourism the answer, or is direct Aboriginal employment through ranger programs and the likes a stepping stone to facilitate that? So another big question, but a really important one.
Tourism is part of the answer, a very important part. The statistics I was giving you before, over 50% of the visitors going into our parks up there are tertiary qualified people. Yeah. High level of education, high level of disposable income. If they're retired, they can't wait to spend the kids' inheritance. So people of that calibre are inquiring, and we have a rich tapestry of culture running across the Pilbara, and the opportunities are just starting to open up. We talked about Clinton Walker doing tours into the biggest art gallery on the face of the earth, in terms of the Murujuga, the Burrup there. You need somebody with you to help you interpret what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And that's the same when you go through Millstream, you go out into Karratha, etc. So there are great opportunities for Aboriginal people to add value to the tourism experiences of the visitors who are going there. They don't have to recreate, they just have to tap into the providers who are already there. So that's one part of it. I touched on the conservation values of the places. It's very, very important. These national parks and our nature reserves are established because they are very biodiversity conservation hotspots. They're very valuable. And one of the big things that we need to do is to ensure that the natural systems can operate and are protected. For example, Aboriginal people used to go across the country and they'd burn the country regularly, low intensity fires. This last year, we undertook as an agency prescribed burning in the Pilbara, 150,000 hectares. Bushfires took place last year, knocked out 750,000 hectares. When the bushfires come through, they're very intense. And the very intense spinifex fires, I don't know whether anyone's seen them, but they're pretty intense. They can cause damage to rock art, but also they can be a threat to life and property.
Yeah.
What we can do is engage with Aboriginal people who are our joint management partners in Karratha, Millstream, in Murujuga, get onto the land and undertake better burning practices. Feral animal control. So it's basically fire, feral and weeds. So there's an opportunity for us to get back into actual traditional land management activities in conjunction with Aboriginal people. The other important thing is that we've amended the CALM Act. It's now an obligation on our agency to manage the value of the land to Aboriginal heritage and culture. And you can only do that with the Aboriginal people. It's their culture, it's their country, and they have to do that with us.
Exactly. Thanks, Peter. Glen, you did touch on it before when I asked your first question, but what investments, both public and private, do you think we need to support the tourism industry in the Pilbara? If you could look at, top sort of 2 or 3, what would you say would be the priorities for now?
I think what we have seen recently is great investment into the amenity of some
Yep.
of the major towns in the Pilbara. I think the Pilbara Cities project has really really provided the opportunity to turn those towns into very welcoming towns that provide amenities not only for residents but for visitors as well.
Yep.
And that's vitally important. It makes people want to stop and stay longer rather than fuel up and keep going, and I think that's been a significant change in recent times. We've seen the freeing up of accommodation across the Pilbara as well, and that also provides great opportunity for tourism where maybe not so long ago it was a bit more of a struggle. But I think it's we're looking there at accommodation and amenities, but I think the key thing for the region is that improvements in access.
Yeah.
Western Australia is a very big state.
It is.
There's not many bigger chunks of dirt around the place.
So when you're talking about access, you're talking about road and
I think
air, all of it?
look, I think
Or-
primarily I'm looking at road.
Yeah, because that's
Because that is the market that's coming at the moment.
Yep.
And they're the ones that we can not only look after now but get them to stay longer.
Yep.
And then spend more.
And they yields more and they do
Yep.
stay longer.
That's
Yep.
right. So and it's about getting that flow of traffic
Yep.
heading in the right direction as well. So we do capitalise on the national parks, the cultural opportunities that are dotted across the Pilbara, but by improved infrastructure, improved access in certain areas. We talk about the Tom Price Karratha Road, and that's probably the first one that would spring to mind. But it's about how we can get that flow going from Karratha to Millstream to
It is, isn't
Murujuga
it?
that incorporates Karratha, Dampier,
Yeah.
and then can activate also the islands off Dampier, where at the moment there is little activation because of little opportunity to get out there.
Yes.
There was talk earlier of the EOI that's out for accommodation in Millstream,
Yep.
and that also provides more opportunity for that trail, and you need that critical mass in terms of accommodation. At the moment we have the eco retreat in Karratha, and which is fantastic, but it is the only accommodation of its type in that area.
Yep.
And if you've got people who want to come a long way to have that type of experience, we need a cluster of that type of accommodation
Yep.
along a route that makes it more worthwhile for people to come that far.
It's really linking, isn't it, and providing economies of scale. If there's more opportunities, more accommodation providers and more linkages in the access, then people will stay longer and then more people will eventually come.
And I think it's back
the
to that
plan.
type of example that we use with the car yards.
Yeah.
One will open and you've got
All the fast
5
food
others all
places.
next door,
Yeah.
and they all thrive by having a
Yeah.
a cluster of that type of industry. And tourism is the same. You need that critical mass
Yeah.
to drive make it worthwhile for people to come that far, and you get that critical mass of experiences that'll grow the tourism visitation at the same time.
Thanks, Glenn. Gabrielle, I just wanted to ask you a bit about employment opportunities available to Aboriginal people, specifically young people in arts and culture related to employment in the Pilbara. So what employment opportunities do you see?
So all of the art centres that operate in the Pilbara and other cultural organisations all offer employment and training opportunities to young people and actually to old people, because a lot of older people are emerging artists because they enter into it at quite an old age. And it's also something, again, that's valued by those organisations because it's that transmission of knowledge to young people. All of the art centres do it, the cultural organisations do it. They're not always training organisations though, so they're often just, cobbling it together. They don't necessarily have staff that are teachers or have qualifications in training. So whilst young people go and work in these organisations, they're developing the skills specific to that, to what that organisation does. But I look at aged care, for example, and that came up earlier, the need for aged care in the Pilbara. And from my experience working in an art centre, all of those young people working, they're cataloguing, they're documenting work, but what they're really doing is aged care. But the centre's not funded as an aged care facility, or the money's not coming from aged care. So I often think that there's other employment opportunities in these organisations that you could use it as a place to train young people to be working in these other required
They're definitely
fields.
transferable skills, aren't they?
Yeah,
so
really
they're learning a
transferable
skill
skills.
set that comes
Yeah.
into a qualification or a cert,
Possibly.
That then, you know, is a transferable skill set without a doubt.
But it's also an employment opportunity that's culturally relevant to the people that are working there.
Yeah.
So a lot of young people I know would really struggle to get jobs in other organisations, but they're performing really well in their art centres. They're travelling across Australia and they're presenting the Pilbara to a much wider audience.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Thanks, Gabrielle. Well, I know that seems amazing, but there's 7 seconds left, so that's all we've got time for on our panel.